Chosen one, stop. Before you scroll past this moment, before you tell yourself this is just another video, just another message that wasn't meant for you, I need you to hear something heaven has been trying to say to you for a very long time. You are not failing. You are finished carrying what heaven never asked you to carry alone. Chosen one. I don't know exactly where you are right now. Maybe you're sitting in a quiet room that used to feel full. Maybe it's late and the house is still, and your mind is running through everything you haven't been able to fix. Maybe you've been strong for so many people, for so many years, that you've forgotten what it feels like to put the weight down. And somewhere deep in a place you don't say out loud, you've been asking a question that terrifies you. Did I miss my time? Let me tell you something that will shake you awake right now. That exhaustion sitting in your bones tonight, it is not the sound of God walking away from you. It is the sound of a builder arriving at the door while you've been standing inside, holding up the roof with your bare hands. You've been gripping that wheel on an icy road so long your hands have cramped around it. You've been standing guard like a soldier who never got the message the war you've been fighting by yourself is already won. You prayed for your children when no one saw you pray. You swallowed grief without applause. You kept showing up to a God who felt silent, kept believing in promises that hadn't moved in years. You were the strong one, the steady one, the one everybody leaned on while you quietly wondered if anyone, including God, noticed how tired you really were. Heaven noticed. Every single sleepless night, every silent tear, every "I'm fine" that cost you everything to say. Here is the truth that changes everything, and I need you to let it land. There is a difference, a holy, crucial difference between faithfulness and over-carrying. God never asked you to carry it all. He asked you to trust the one who could. Before this message is finished, you will understand exactly why the silence felt so long, why the delay stretched so far, why the heaviness never seemed to lift, and you will see, clearly, that none of it was abandonment. It was the final signal that God was stepping in. Exhaustion is not always the sign to quit. Sometimes, listen to me, sometimes it is the sign that you have finally reached the edge of human strength. And that edge? That is exactly where divine takeover begins. If this message is finding you in a season of deep exhaustion, if something in your chest just recognized itself in these words, type in the comments right now, "Lord, take over." Let those 3 words be your exhale, your release, your first act of surrender. Stay with me, because the most important question hasn't been asked yet. What have you been carrying that God never assigned you to carry in the first place? You were faithful, but somewhere along the way, faithfulness turned into over-carrying. Let me ask you something that nobody around you has had the courage to ask. When did you stop trusting the rain and start watering the field yourself every single hour? You know what I mean. You started praying. That was right. You started believing. That was holy. But then somewhere quietly, gradually, without anyone announcing it, prayer turned into worry with your eyes closed. Belief turned into control with a scripture attached to it. And faithfulness. Faithfulness turned into something God never asked you to carry this long. This is the thing nobody talks about in church. There are people in the pews, faithful people, praying people, people who've served God for 40, 50, 60 years, who are utterly crushed. Not because they are weak, not because their faith failed, but because they have been doing God's portion along with their own, and they don't even know it. Chosen one, I need you to hear this slowly. There is a difference between carrying your cross and carrying someone else's cross. God's cross, your children's cross, your family's future, your church's survival, and the outcome of every prayer you've ever whispered, all at the same time. One of those is faithfulness. The other one is spiritual overexertion, and it is crushing you. Think about Martha. You remember her. Luke chapter 10. Jesus himself is sitting in her living room, the Son of God, right there in her house, and Martha is in the kitchen, spinning, fixing, managing, controlling every detail. Troubled about many things, the scripture says. Troubled about many things, while Mary sat at his feet and received. Jesus didn't rebuke Martha because she worked hard. He said, "You are anxious and troubled about many things." How many of you have been anxious and troubled about many things and called it faithfulness? How many of you have been so busy holding everything together that you never once sat down long enough to let God hold you? And then there's Moses, Numbers chapter 20. He has prayed for this people. He has interceded, led, protected, endured 40 years of wilderness for a generation that complained through every mile of it. And in one exhausted, frustrated moment, he strikes the rock instead of speaking to it. Just one act of overreach. One moment where Moses stepped into God's portion out of sheer human depletion. That is what chronic overcarrying does. It doesn't just tire you out. It eventually moves your hands into spaces that belong only to God. And beloved, it happened to Abraham too. God gave him a promise, a son, a legacy, a future as certain as the stars. But the promise didn't come fast enough for human hands. So Abraham reached for Hagar. He tried to help God keep his word. He took the outcome into his own management, and that one act of helping God created a conflict that echoed through generations. Are you helping God keep his promises right now? Are you lying awake at night, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet, managing outcomes you cannot control, mentally carrying your grown children to the altar because you are terrified that if you stop interceding for one moment, everything will fall apart? That is not prayer. That is fear wearing the clothing of responsibility. And I know, you don't see it that way. Because you love them. Because someone has to hold the family together. Because you've been the dependable one your entire life. And the thought of putting it down feels like abandonment. But hear what heaven is actually saying to you right now. You are a mother sleeping in your shoes, afraid of what the night might bring, when the one who neither slumbers nor sleeps has been awake the entire time. You are carrying furniture into a house that is still under construction. You are bringing the load God hasn't even asked for yet. And your back is breaking under weight that was never yours to move. Here is the truth that will either sting or set you free, and I pray it does both. The outcomes belong to God. The hearts of your children belong to God. The timing of the promise belongs to God. The doors that need to open belong to God. Your only assignment was obedience. And somewhere along the road, you quietly picked up his portion too. That is why you are exhausted in a way that sleep cannot fix. That is why you wake up already tired. That is why even rest feels like guilt, because you were never given permission to put it down. But I am giving you that permission right now. Not mine, heavens. If you have been carrying things in your mind that only God can carry to completion, whisper it right where you are, right now, wherever you're sitting. I release what was never mine. Let those words be the first crack in a burden that has had its hands on you long enough. Because here is the question that will carry you into the next part of this message, and I need you to sit with it. If God was always going to take over, why did he let you carry it this long? The answer to that question will change the way you see every year of waiting, every unanswered prayer, every silent season you thought was God's absence. Stay with me. Let me ask you something that nobody has been honest enough to say to your face. Some of you are not just tired. You are tired of trying to understand why God let it take this long. You have prayed the same prayers for years. You have stood on the same promises for decades. You watched younger people step into blessings you've been believing God for since before they were born. And somewhere in the quiet somewhere, you don't even say out loud to yourself, a question has been eating at you. Did God forget me? Or worse, did he just decide I wasn't worth answering? I need you to stay right here with me. Because what I'm about to tell you is not encouragement. It is not a pep talk. It is a revelation, and it will reframe every silent year of your life in the next few minutes. God was not absent during the silence. He was building something in you that noise would have destroyed. Think about concrete. When they pour the foundation of a skyscraper right here in New York City, that concrete doesn't harden above ground where you can watch it. It cures underground, in the dark, under pressure, invisible to everyone passing by. And the longer it cures, the stronger it becomes. You cannot rush it. If you break it open too early, the whole building falls. That is what God has been doing in you. He was not ignoring your prayers. He was letting the foundation cure in the dark because he already knew the weight of glory he intended to place on your life. Look at Joseph. 17 years old when heaven gave him a dream, thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, forgotten in a prison cell for years. If you had asked Joseph at year 10 whether God was listening, what do you think he would have said? But here is what Joseph could not see from inside that cell. Every single day of that silence was building the character that would one day run an entire empire. The prison was not punishment. The prison was preparation. David wrote his most powerful psalms from a cave hiding from a king who wanted him dead, anointed by God, but not yet seated on the throne. Elijah, the mightiest prophet in Israel, sat alone by a brook, fed by ravens, hidden from the world. Jesus himself, the Son of God, spent 40 days in a wilderness so silent that the only voice he heard was the devil's. Do you see the pattern? God hides his most dangerous weapons before he deploys them. Not because they are weak, because they are not yet finished. And you, chosen one, you have been in the finishing room. The silence was not empty. It was crowded with preparation. Let that land. Read it again if you need to. The silence was not empty. It was crowded with preparation. Every season you felt overlooked, heaven was removing something from you. Every delay you suffered through, God was stripping away a false support, a crutch you leaned on instead of him. Every door that closed, every prayer that seemed to bounce off the ceiling, every year that passed without the answer you begged for, God was not withholding. He was excavating. He was digging down past your performance, past your willpower, past the version of you that believed if you just tried harder, prayed louder, believed stronger, you could make it happen yourself. He was digging all the way down to the place where only one thing remains: trust. Not effort, not strategy, not the white-knuckled faith that holds on because it has to, but the deep, settled, unshakable knowing that says, even if I never understand why, I know who is holding me. A surgeon does not pick up the scalpel the moment the patient walks in. He waits. He waits until the anesthesia is deep enough, until the body is completely still. Because if the patient flinches during the procedure, the cut meant to heal becomes the cut that kills. God has been waiting for that same stillness in you, not because he was cruel, because he loves you too much to operate before you were ready. And here is the thing that is going to shake you. The silence was also protection. There are blessings heaven could not release to you while certain people were still in your ear, certain fears were still running your decisions, certain versions of yourself were still in charge. The silence cleared the room. It removed the noise. It brought you to this exact moment where you are finally tired enough, humble enough, still enough to let God do what only God can do. You are not behind, chosen one. You are right on time for a God who does not operate on a human clock. The silence is ending. Stay with this message, because in the next part, I am going to show you the signs that tell you heaven is no longer just preparing in secret. Heaven is beginning to move openly. And those signs may already be showing up in your life right now, and you might be calling them coincidence. Now, Stay right here with me, because what I'm about to tell you, most preachers won't say it this plainly. You've been calling it a problem. God has been calling it a process. You've been calling it weakness. Heaven has been calling it transition. And the difference between those two interpretations, that difference is everything. Here is a question I need you to sit with for just a moment. When was the last time you tried to force something that used to come easily and it just wouldn't move? When was the last time you pushed on a door that once swung wide open and this time it didn't budge even an inch? Most people panic at that feeling. They pray harder, they push longer, they tell themselves they just need more faith, more effort, more drive. But what if the door didn't stop opening because God forgot you? What if it stopped opening because God is done sending you through that door? Chosen one, divine takeover almost never arrives with thunder and a bright light. It arrives quietly, it arrives through interruption, and the first sign, the very first signal that heaven is stepping in, is this: your old methods stop working, not because you failed, because God graduated you. Think about heavy machinery on a construction site. When one stage of the building is complete, the machines go silent. To someone standing on the street, it looks like the project has stalled. But the builder knows exactly what he's doing. He has simply moved to the next phase. And the next phase requires different tools. You are not stalled. The builder has changed stages. Now let me give you the signs, and I want you to be honest with yourself as I name each one. You are too tired to force what once consumed you. The things that used to drive you, the hustle, the proving, the relentless pushing, they no longer have the same pull. You reach for them and your hands feel empty. You feel drawn to silence more than noise. Crowds that once energized you now drain you. Conversations that once felt urgent now feel hollow. Something in you keeps pulling towards stillness. Doors are closing and you didn't close them. People are shifting. Responsibilities that once clung to you like weight are beginning slowly, strangely to lift away on their own. And the strangest sign of all? Peace is showing up in places where panic used to live. You cannot explain it. You cannot manufacture it. But it is there. Chosen one, I need you to hear this next line with everything you have. That is not depression. That is not decline. There is a sacred difference between the two, and the enemy has been using your confusion about that difference to keep you ashamed of a season you should be celebrating. Depression empties hope, but divine slowing, God's intentional quieting of your flesh that makes space. It clears the ground. It silences the noise, so the Spirit can finally be heard above everything else. Proverbs 3-5 says it plainly. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, not your strategy, not your timeline, not your survival method. Your heart. And for those of you watching today who have more years behind you than you ever imagined you'd carry, I want to speak to you directly right now. Not every slowing down is decline. Say that again to yourself. Not every slowing down is decline. Some slowing down is God repositioning you. Some stillness is God rebuilding your foundation before He adds another floor. The relay runner doesn't grip the baton forever. There comes a sacred moment when the hand opens, and what felt like loss of control is actually the completion of a divine handoff. You were never meant to run every lap. You were meant to run yours. And now heaven is saying, your lap is done. The baton is leaving your hand, not because you ran poorly, because you ran faithfully, and now something greater is taking the next leg of the race. The book of Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, not they that force, not they that manufacture, they that wait. Waiting. In the original Hebrew, that word is kava. It means to twist together, like strands of a rope wrapping tighter around one another. It is an active, sacred twisting of your life around his. And here is the midpoint truth, the line I need to land deep in your spirit right now. What looks like your loss of momentum may actually be God removing your need to manufacture momentum. You were never the source. You were always the vessel. And when heaven takes over a vessel, it clears it first. If you sense that God is shutting down your old way of surviving, if something in you just whispered yes to even one of those signs, type right now in the comments, "I feel the shift," and then send this to someone you love, someone who has been carrying too much for too long. Because they need to know what you are just beginning to understand. The takeover has already begun, but I have to warn you, just because God is stepping in does not mean the transition feels easy. Why does divine takeover, a gift from heaven itself, still feel so uncomfortable? That answer is coming, and it will change the way you see everything. Now I need to say something that nobody else is going to say to you today. Because what happens next, right after you decide to stop carrying it all, is the part nobody warns you about. And if you don't understand it, you will misread it. You will call it failure. You will call it weakness. You will turn back around and pick everything right back up again. So stay with me, because this part matters more than you know. The moment you stop striving, the moment you actually try to surrender, something unexpected happens. It gets harder before it gets lighter, and that terrifies people, especially people like you, people who have been strong for a very, very long time. Here is what nobody tells you about surrender. When you have spent 30, 40, 50 years keeping everything from falling apart, when control became the only thing standing between you and disaster, your whole nervous system learns to treat stillness as danger. Think about that. Let it sink in. You didn't choose anxiety. You didn't choose to need control. You learned it. You learned it young, in a world that didn't always show up for you. Maybe nobody came when you cried. Maybe you watched things fall apart when someone let go. So you decided quietly, privately, somewhere deep inside, that you were the rescue plan, that if you stopped holding it all, everything would collapse. And you've been living from that decision ever since. That is not weakness. That is survival intelligence. God is not angry at the coping mechanism that kept you alive. But beloved, and hear me say this with everything I have, what saved you in the wilderness cannot sustain you in the promised land. The Bible says it plainly in Isaiah 43:18, 1:9. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. God is not asking you to forget what happened. He is asking you to stop letting what happened write the rules for what happens next. Because here is what is actually occurring in this uncomfortable middle that you have been misreading as failure. God is healing your nervous system before He restores your circumstances. He is not slow. He is surgical. He cannot build a new life on top of a soul still wired for emergency. He cannot pour rest into a spirit still running threat assessments every moment of every day. Before the miracle comes, He must first rewire the person who is going to receive it. Think of a person who has been at sea for years. When they finally step off that boat onto solid ground, the earth still feels like it's moving. Their body keeps rocking even when nothing is rocking anymore. That is not weakness. That is the body catching up to new reality. That is exactly where you are right now. You stepped off the boat, but your soul still feels the rocking. And that disorientation, that strange, uncomfortable gap between releasing and receiving, you have been calling it doubt. Heaven calls it detox. You are being detoxed from decades of self-reliance. And can I tell you what makes it even harder for people your age? You were raised in a generation that did not talk about pain. You were raised to push through, show up, and keep your private battles private. Rest was laziness. Asking for help was weakness. Needing God to carry something meant you had failed to carry it yourself. So now when heaven says rest, your body panics. The quiet brings things to the surface you have spent years burying. Grief you never processed. Disappointment you swallowed whole. Fear you locked away in a room you never opened. And when those things start rising, you do what you have always done. You reach for the wheel. You pick up the load. You go back to busy, because busy at least feels like something. But chosen one, I need you to hear this as if heaven is speaking it directly over your life right now. The fear that rises when you rest is not a sign to keep going. It is what was always there, finally surfacing, finally asking to be healed. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." He is not close to the ones who have it together. He is close to the ones finally honest enough to admit they don't. That trembling you feel when you try to put it down, that is not proof you should keep carrying it. That is a guard dog that has been on duty so long it has forgotten what it feels like to lie down. It does not know how to stop protecting. It does not trust that it is finally, actually, safe. And God, with all the patience of a father who has been waiting decades for this moment, is kneeling down right now, looking that trembling soul in the eyes and saying, "You can lie down now. I've got the watch." This is where identity begins to be rewritten, not from carrier to quitter, not from strong to weak, from carrier to trust bearer, from fixer to witness, from protector to receiver. That is not a smaller calling, that is a higher one. And here is the hardest truth in this entire message, the one that will set you completely free if you let it land. The hardest part of divine takeover is not believing God can move. It is believing you are finally, after all this time, allowed to stop carrying what has been crushing you. Right here, right now, take a breath, a real one, and say it out loud. Say it where your body can hear it. I am allowed to rest in God, not just in your mind. Let your chest hear it. Let your hands hear it. Let the part of you that has been clenched for 30 years just begin to open. Because what happens when a chosen one finally, truly lets God take over? That is exactly what comes next. Chosen one, stay with me right here. Because this is the part nobody tells you about surrender. Everyone talks about letting go. Preachers talk about it. Songs are written about it. But almost nobody tells you what actually happens the moment you open your hands and release what you've been white-knuckling for years. Let me tell you, it is like stepping inside from cold rain you've been walking in so long you forgot you were wet. You pull off that soaked, heavy coat, and for one breathless second, you just stand there, feeling the weight lift, feeling the cold leave your shoulders, feeling the warmth of the room you've been standing just outside of the entire time. That is the divine exchange, and God is offering it to you, right now, today. Here is the truth that will change the way you pray for the rest of your life. When heaven takes over, God does not always move faster first. He moves deeper first. Let that settle in, because you've been measuring God's movement by speed, by visible results, by whether things changed by Tuesday. But heaven doesn't operate on your calendar. Heaven operates on your readiness and depth, the kind of deep, unshakable peace that does not crack under pressure, that takes a holy God moving through the hidden rooms of a surrendered soul. Jesus said it plainly, Matthew 11:28. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Not I will give you answers, not I will give you a 5-step plan." He said rest, because rest is where the exchange begins. You want to know what the exchange actually looks like in a real life in your life? You wake up one morning and realize you made a decision yesterday clearly, calmly, without 3 weeks of anxious circling, and it was the right one. That is discernment, replacing confusion. You are in a conversation with someone, and something inside you just knows, not from suspicion, but from a deep spiritual clarity, that this person does not belong in your next season. That is God-given wisdom replacing people-pleasing fear. You pray one night, and instead of it feeling like pushing a boulder uphill, it feels like breathing. Light, natural, real. That is intimacy replacing performance. You sleep, actual, restful sleep, and you wake up, and the dread that used to greet you at 4 inches the morning is not there. In its place, quiet. A stillness that makes no logical sense given what you're still walking through. That is the peace of God, which Paul said in Philippians 4-7, surpasses all understanding. Not the peace that comes after everything is resolved, the peace that arrives before it is. And chosen one, I need to say this directly to those of you who have walked this earth for 60, 70, 80 years. Listen carefully. The world lied to you when it said your latter years would be your heaviest. Heaven says the opposite is true. What took everything you had at 40, the striving, the proving, the pushing, can now be carried in grace. Because you have something the young ones are still learning. You have the history. You have the testimony. You have walked with God long enough to know that He has never once failed to show up. And that knowing? That is not nothing. That is everything. The psalmist cried out, "Be still and know that I am God." Not be still and hope. Not be still and wish. Be still and know. The knowing comes inside the stillness. And you are being invited right now into that sacred, luminous place. Here is the climax of this entire section, and I need you to hear it like a key turning in a lock that has been stuck for years. God is not calling you to emptiness. He is calling you to exchange. Every burden you lay down becomes a doorway, not to avoid, not to uncertainty, but to peace that moves in, clarity that sharpens, and a power that operates not through your strength but through your availability. You are not giving up. You are trading up. Trading a cracked lantern for daylight. Trading a room with all the windows sealed shut for one window finally opened, and feeling the whole room breathe again. That is what surrender does. That is what heaven fills. Paul understood this. He wrote in 2 Corinthians 12-9, and these words are medicine for every chosen one who ever felt ashamed of their limitations. My strength is made perfect in weakness, not despite your weakness, perfect in it. Your exhaustion is not a liability. In heaven's economy, it is the precise condition where divine power operates at full capacity. If you are ready for that exchange, ready to stop carrying what God never assigned you, say this right now, wherever you are. Lord, I give you the weight, not tomorrow, right now. Let those 6 words be the moment the exchange begins. Stay with me, because what comes next in this message is not more comfort. What comes next is confrontation, because here is the question that will stop you cold, and it is the one most people never honestly answer. If you know, surrender leads to peace. If you've seen the evidence, if you've felt heaven pulling at your hands, why do some parts of you still refuse to let go? You're still here, and I need you to know that is not an accident, because what I'm about to say next is the part most messages never touch. The part that lives below the exhaustion, below the prayers, below everything you've already surrendered. There is something buried deeper than your burdens. It is the belief that built them. Chosen one, let me ask you something you may have never allowed yourself to answer honestly. What if you are not just tired from carrying too much? What if some part of you is afraid to put it down? Sit with that for a moment, because here is what decades of pain can do to a soul. It can take real experience, real wounds, real abandoned moments, real times when nobody showed up, and quietly convert all of that into a belief system, a theology of survival, a gospel that says, if I don't do it, nobody will. If I stop worrying, it means I stopped caring. Rest is dangerous. Stillness is surrender. And surrender is how you lose. You didn't choose those beliefs. Life handed them to you, and at the time, they kept you standing. But chosen one, listen to me carefully. What once kept you alive can become the very thing keeping you from living. The Bible says in Proverbs 14:12, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the road to destruction." Some of you have a way of carrying that feels like faith. It looks like responsibility. It sounds like dedication. But underneath it, if you are honest, underneath it is something closer to fear. Fear that if you release the wheel, the car goes off the cliff. Fear that God is good in general, but maybe not specific enough for your situation. Fear that trust is something you preach, but vigilance is something you practice. And so you have been sitting in the driver's seat, hands locked at 10 and 2, praying out loud for God to lead, while your foot quietly stays on the brake. That is not a condemnation. That is a confession for millions of people who love God deeply and still cannot fully let go. Here is the truth the enemy does not want you to see. He is not most threatened by busy believers. He is not most threatened by striving believers. He is most threatened by surrendered ones. Because an exhausted believer who still thinks everything depends on them, that believer is contained, controlled by their own weight, spending every ounce of spiritual energy, maintaining what God already offered to carry. You have become the most useful tool the enemy has, not because you are weak, but because you are strong in the wrong direction. And here is where it cuts deepest. For some of you, the carrying is no longer just a habit. It has become your identity. You are the one who never breaks, the one people call in crisis, the one who holds the family together, holds the finances together, holds the faith together while everything shakes. And somewhere along the way, without realizing it, you stopped being a person who carries burdens and became a person defined by them. Take that away and who are you? That question is not cruel. That question is the doorway, because the version of you that was built around being needed, being strong, being the one who never quits, that version was forged in fire, yes, but it was forged in your fire, human fire, survival fire. And God is not trying to improve that version. He is calling you out of it, like a soldier still sleeping in full armor, years after the battle zone has changed, still flinching at sounds that are no longer threats, still guarding a post that heaven already relieved you from. Like a person standing in a storm, holding a broken umbrella, soaking to the bone, refusing to walk 10 steps into the house because letting go of even a broken shelter feels like giving up. Chosen one, God is not asking you to stop being faithful. He is asking you to stop being the foundation, because you were never meant to be the foundation. He was, He is, He always will be. And sometimes, hear this, sometimes what God must remove is not only the burden in your hands, it is the version of you that was built around carrying it. That is not loss, that is resurrection. If you are still here, and you feel that landing somewhere real inside you, this moment is yours. Type in the comments right now, I release the old me. Not the faithful you, not the praying you, not the one who loves God with everything, the overburdened, over-striving, over-carrying version, the one built by survival, not by grace. That is who heaven is, lovingly, powerfully, finally calling you out of. You release that version today, because what comes next, what God stepping in fully looks like for a chosen one, that is something your over-carrying self could never have received. But the surrendered you, that person is ready. Now let me show you what actually happens. Not in theory, not in theology you have to decode, but in real, breathing, tangible life, when a person finally stops straining and lets heaven move. Because here is what nobody tells you about divine takeover. It does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like dawn. You ever watch the sun take over a dark room? It does not ask the darkness for permission. It does not knock. It does not negotiate. It simply comes, and everything that was hidden begins to reveal itself in the light. That is exactly how God moves when a chosen one finally releases the grip. Quietly, completely, unstoppably. Think about the Red Sea. Moses did not part those waters by pushing harder. He raised his staff, an act of pure surrender, and God did what no human strategy could ever engineer. 2 million people walked through on dry ground. Not damp, dry. That is not metaphor. That is the God you serve, showing you what he is capable of the moment you stop trying to swim across on your own. Think about Jehoshaphat. The enemy was closing in from 3 directions, 3 armies, and God's instruction was not to sharpen their swords. It was this: stand still and watch me work. They sent the worshippers out first, and the enemy destroyed themselves before Israel ever drew a weapon. Think about the widow whose oil would not stop flowing. She poured and poured and poured again. But only after she borrowed the jars, only after she acted on a word she could not yet see fulfilled. The miracle did not start until she moved in surrender, not in strategy. That is the pattern, every single time. And chosen one, that same God has not retired. So, let me describe what begins to happen when heaven takes over your life. Because you need language for this. You need to recognize it when it comes. Your heart begins to shift without you manipulating it. Bitterness you carried for 11 years quietly loses its grip. You do not know exactly when it left. You just notice one morning that the weight is not there anymore. Doors begin to open without you begging anyone. A call you were not expecting. An opportunity with your name already written on it. A connection that makes no logical sense but fits perfectly. You did not force it. You did not perform for it. It simply aligned because heaven arranged it. Peace begins to guard your mind, and not the kind that requires you to distract yourself 24 hours a day. Real peace, settled peace, the kind Philippians 4:7 describes as passing all understanding. The kind that stands at the door of your thoughts like a sentinel and turns anxiety away before it can unpack. Decisions become cleaner. That fog you have been living in, where every choice felt like stepping blindfolded onto a highway, begins to lift. You start hearing that still small voice more clearly, because you are no longer drowning it out with striving. Answers that were delayed for years surface at exactly the right time. Not early, not late. On time, God's time, which is the only time that actually matters. And energy returns. Not the kind you manufacture on coffee and willpower, but a renewal from the inside. Isaiah 40:31 calls it mounting up on wings. You have felt it before, those moments where something beyond your body carried you through a day that should have broken you. That is what becomes your new normal. Now listen carefully, because this is where I need to speak directly to you. Some of you watching right now are in your 60s, 70s, 80s, and the enemy has been whispering a vicious lie directly into your ear. He has been telling you that restoration is for younger people, that the years of your greatest flourishing are behind you, that God's best moves are reserved for the ones still in their prime. That is a lie. Lazarus was dead 4 days, not hours. 4 days. The disciples thought it was over. Martha thought it was over. And Jesus walked up to that tomb, not to mourn, but to demonstrate something the world needed to see. He said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" He was not talking to a 20-year-old with decades ahead of him. He was talking to people who had already grieved the loss. And God is saying the same thing over your life right now. The things you have already grieved, the dreams you buried in seasons that felt final, the version of you that you quietly said goodbye to somewhere between the hospital and the silence and the long nights nobody saw. God is standing outside that tomb today, and He does not need your calendar to cooperate. He does not need your age to agree. He does not need favorable conditions, perfect timing, or anyone's permission. When God takes over, what wore you out in your own strength begins to yield under His authority. What dragged in your hands for years moves like a river. What you could only manage inch by inch begins to flow. That locked mechanism that would not turn? The right key has entered. And, chosen one, the door is already moving. If you feel heaven shifting something in you right now, even something small, even just a flicker of hope where there was none, type in the comments. Heaven, move in me. Let that be your agreement. Let that be the moment you stop fighting what God is already doing. Stay with me. Because what comes next is for the ones who are still standing here, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they have already missed their season. That lie is about to break wide open. This part of the message is especially for you, not the younger listener who stumbled across this video, not the one still climbing the first mountain. This is for the one who has already crossed deserts that would have broken most people and is still standing, still breathing, still here. Heaven does not waste seasoned vessels. But let me ask you something that nobody around you has been brave enough to ask out loud. When did you start believing that your best years were behind you? Was it the morning your body reminded you it wasn't 25 anymore? Was it the day someone younger got the seat at the table you had been faithful enough to earn? Was it the quiet Sunday afternoon when you sat in a house that used to be full of noise and realized the silence wasn't peaceful, it was just empty? You have carried a grief that has no clean name. It is not just the loss of people, though. God knows you have buried enough of them to last a lifetime. It is the loss of being seen, the slow, steady ache of becoming invisible in a world that moves faster every single year. You walk into rooms and people look past you. You speak, and they are already reaching for their phones. You carry decades of hard-won wisdom inside your chest, and nobody seems to be asking for it. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, somewhere between the doctor's appointments and the sleepless nights and the prayers that felt like they were hitting a ceiling, a lie crept in. The lie that said, "Your season is finished. I need you to hear me right now, and I need you to hear me clearly." That is not God's voice. That is not heaven speaking. That is the enemy, terrified because he knows something about you that you have almost forgotten. Your endurance became oil. Every year you kept trusting when trust was hard, that was oil being pressed. Every tear you cried in a room where nobody saw you, that was oil being refined. Every time you chose to forgive when bitterness would have been easier. Every morning you got up when giving up made more sense. Every prayer you whispered when heaven felt completely silent, pressed, refined, deepened, made precious. You are not a dry well. You are an olive that has been under pressure long enough to produce something rare. Think about Moses, 80 years old, standing barefoot in the desert in front of a burning bush, not at the beginning of his journey, but at the beginning of his greatest one. 80 years of preparation. 40 years in the wilderness, forgotten by the world, until God said, "Now." Think about Caleb, 85 years old, standing at the edge of his inheritance and saying with the fire of a young man, "Give me this mountain." He did not say, "Give me the easy valley." He said, "Give me the hard thing," because decades of waiting had not made him weaker. It had made him certain. Think about Anna, 84 years old, widowed, faithful in the temple, year after year after year, when the world had long stopped watching. And when the Messiah of the entire universe was carried through those doors as an infant, she was the one who recognized him, not the young priests, not the scholars, Anna. Because God trusted her eyes. He trusted them because they had been fixed on heaven for longer than most people had been alive. Your age is not disqualification, it is depth. A tree does not bear its richest fruit in its first years. It bears it after winters have driven the roots down deeper than any shallow soil could hold. A violin does not make its most beautiful music when it is new. It makes it after the wood has aged, after time has tightened what needed tightening, deepened what needed deepening. You are that instrument, and heaven is picking you up. God often trusts older hands with weightier assignments because those hands have finally stopped reaching for applause. You no longer need the recognition. You no longer need the stage. You have been through enough to know that the only approval that matters came from a throne, not a crowd. And that kind of freedom that is dangerous to the darkness. Your scars are not shame. They are discernment. You have survived what others are still afraid of. You know things in your bones that cannot be taught in a classroom. You have a spiritual authority that can only come from having walked through fire and choosing not to become it. And heaven is saying, I have been waiting for this version of you, not the version that was performing, not the version that was striving. This version, the one who has been through enough to finally be still, the one who has lost enough to finally hold loosely, the one who is tired enough to finally let God lead. You are not too old. You are too formed to be wasted. Say that again inside your spirit. Let it land somewhere the lie has been living. The divine takeover that heaven is releasing over your life right now, in these later chapters, can produce the most fruitful, the most peaceful, the most spiritually powerful season you have ever known. Not in spite of your years, because of them. If you are listening in the later chapters of life, declare it boldly right now. My season is not over. Say it like you mean it. Type it in the comments. And if this word found you, if it broke something loose that needed breaking, send it to someone else who needs to hear that heaven still has use for them. Because the question is no longer whether God has something left for you. The question is this: now that heaven has said, I am taking over, how do you respond? That answer, that is where we are headed next. You made it to the end of this message, and I want you to understand something that is not an accident. You did not stay this long because this was entertaining. You stayed because something in your spirit recognized itself in every word. Something deep, something honest, something that has not had a voice in a very long time, finally heard itself spoken out loud. So before we close, let me walk you back through what just happened. You came into this message carrying weight you could not name, weight that did not show on your face but lived in your bones. You had been faithful, genuinely, deeply faithful, praying for children who don't call back, carrying grief no one helped you carry, holding families together with trembling hands, while wondering in the quiet hours why God still had you waiting. You were not failing, you were over-carrying, and there is a difference, a holy, life-changing difference between a person who has lost their faith and a person who has simply been carrying what was never theirs to finish. One needs to be corrected, the other needs to be relieved. God was never disappointed in you. He was waiting for the moment you would finally open your hands. The silence was not punishment. The delay was not rejection. The years that felt like nothing were the years God was building something in you that could not be rushed, roots so deep that when the blessing finally arrived, you would not be swept away by it. Hebrews 6:10 says it plainly. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him. He has not forgotten a single prayer you whispered into an empty room, not one. But now, right now, heaven is asking you to do the one thing that is harder than all the years of endurance combined. Let go. Release the outcome you have been managing in your mind every morning. Release the timeline you built and rebuilt again. Release the people you cannot fix, no matter how much you love them. Release the open loops, the unfinished conversations, the doors that never opened. Release the silent belief, the one you've never said out loud, that if you stop holding everything together, everything will fall apart. It will not fall apart. It will fall into place. Because the builder was at the door the whole time. You were holding up the roof with your bare hands, and he was standing right outside, ready to do what only he can do if you would just step back and let him in. Think about a weary traveler who has been dragging a heavy suitcase for 20 miles. And the entire time, someone was walking right beside them, strong, willing, able, simply waiting to be asked. That is your story. That has always been your story. Now I want you to do something right now. Not tomorrow, not after the video ends. Right now. Pray this with me. Lord, I have done what I could do. I have prayed and endured and stood and waited and obeyed. Now I place into your hands what was never mine to finish. Take over what I cannot carry. Lead where I cannot see. Heal what I cannot reach. Open what I cannot force. Close what I cannot discern. And let peace return to the places in me that have lived too long in strain. Let that prayer settle in your chest like a window finally latched shut after years of wind. Let the room go still. Let the striving stop. Because here is the truth that heaven has been building to this entire message. The truth I need you to carry out of this room and into the rest of your life. When God says you have done enough, He is not dismissing you. He is not retiring you. He is not saying your life no longer matters or your assignment is over. He is saying your season of strain is finished. You are not being removed from the story. You are being promoted out of survival and into partnership. The next movement of your life will not be powered by your effort. It will be carried by His hand. That is not weakness. That is the highest form of faith a human being can reach. Your age does not cancel your assignment. Your exhaustion does not erase your anointing. Your waiting did not disqualify you. It qualified you for something that requires exactly the kind of person you have become. Revelation 3:21. To the one who overcomes, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne. You have overcome, not by being perfect, by not quitting. Now rest. Not the rest of someone who gave up, the rest of someone who finally handed the suitcase to the one who was walking beside them all along and felt, for the first time in years, what it means to walk free. Chosen one, if this message found you at the right moment, if it reached the place in you that needed it most, write in the comments right now, Lord, take over. Not as a ritual, as a release. And if you know someone who has been strong for too long, someone who needs to hear that their exhaustion is not a sign of failure, but a signal that God is stepping in, share this message with them today. You might not know how much they need it, but heaven does. Subscribe so the next message finds you ready. And remember this, carry it with you. Rest is not your surrender to defeat. Rest is your surrender to divine authority. You have done enough. Now let Him take over.